Hello dear students, good afternoon everyone. How are you all doing? I believe that you are back to your home after your examination and I believe that your exam was really very good. Today I am over here to solve the paper so that all of your tension, whether you have written the correct answer or not, will be completely clear. Well, my name is Ahmed sir and I am over here to solve all the questions from today's biology paper. So let's get started. Alright, so here is the question that we have. The entire question paper will be solved by me and we'll discuss that what was the best probable solution for each and every question. Okay, you can drop your comments in the chat section also if you have any specific questions. Alright, so we'll get started now. We'll start with section number 1. Each question over here will carry 1 mark. Okay, so we should always make sure that how many marks are we getting to write that answer, and accordingly the length of that answer will be determined. Okay, so section 1, question number 1. Question number 1 says, which phenomenon acts as a driving force to pull water from root xylem cell to leaf cell in the plant during the daytime? Okay, now if you look over here, there are two forces which is responsible for movement of water inside the plant cells. Okay, let's try to revise that. Okay, so we have, let's say that we have a plant like this is the ground and we have its root extended deep inside the soil, right? So the very first force which is responsible for the movement of water inside the plant is osmosis. This is because of differences in concentration level of water inside the plant cell and outside the plant cell. Okay, however, this osmosis will lead the water from the outside of the root to get into it, and it will reach up to certain level. Why up to certain level? Because osmotic pressure is not enough to make the water go to the extreme height of the plant. Okay, so therefore there comes second force which is really very important, and that's what we are gonna talk about over here. Okay, what happens is during the daytime, strong rays of the sun heats up the leaves, and leaves has stomatal openings. These stomatal openings will absorb the heat and will release water in the form of vapors. Okay, now when the water is released in the form of vapor, a partial vacuum is created in the bottom part of the tree, and therefore what happens is the water gets absorbed because of this vacuum created, and then therefore the second force which is responsible over here is actually the evaporation of water. Now this evaporation of water is actually called as transpiration. Okay, right, this is called as transpiration, and the force that we call it is transpirational pull. Okay, the process is called as transpiration, and the force which is being applied because of this process is called as transpirational pull. Okay, so the correct answer is transpirational pull. The question is, which phenomenon acts as driving force to pull water from the root xylem cell to leaf cell in the plant during the daytime? And if you see, the daytime is the highlight of this question. Why daytime? Because we need sun. Because the sun is not there, then evaporation of water will not happen, and if evaporation of water is not happening, we would say that the evaporation that the vacuum which is being generated in the trunk of the tree will not be sufficient enough. Okay, so yes, the correct answer is transpiration or transpirational pull. I believe this is clear to all of you, right? So if you have written this or something related to this, then you will get the marks. We'll moving to the next question. Okay, now this is one of the most easiest question of this paper. Write a slogan on save our earth. Very simple, you can write anything over here, you can get marks, right? Fine, so we can write clean, we can say clean planet, comma green planet, right? This can be one slogan, and you know there is no right or wrong answer over here. It should be a slogan which is relevant to the topic that is given to us. That's it, right? So I have written clean planet, green planet, right? The other slogan can be make our home clean for the future, for the future. Fine. So this can be also slogan. Slogan can be small, catchy, and it should convey the message what you want to say, right? So there is n number of answers possibilities that you can write over here. I just gave you 2 example. There is no right or wrong answer over here. The only thing is like it should be relevant, okay, and there should be no spelling mistakes when you're writing this slogans over here, okay. So yeah, that's it. If you have written the slogan, then yes, you will get the marks for it, okay. The next thing over here, identify the instrument used in the given picture. If you look in this picture over here, you will see that the arm is wrapped with a band, and then there is a balloon like structure, and then we have a meter which can be considered as a gauge also, right? This is usually used to determine the blood pressure, all right. It will determine what? It will determine the blood pressure. Basically what happens is the band will apply a downward force on the skin and the muscle, and based on Newton's third law of motion, for every action there is equal and opposite reaction. So our muscles and our blood will be exerting equal opposite reaction. That force will be counted over here using this gauge, okay. Now this instrument is actually used for measuring the blood pressure of a patient, okay, and this instrument is called as sphygmomanometer, okay. Sphygmomanometer, one of the biggest word over here, okay. Sphygmomanometer, okay. So this is the correct answer in this case. If you have written this, then you have got the correct marks, okay. Moving ahead to the next part. Now define the term heredity. What do you mean by heredity? It is a process of passing down biological characters from a higher generation level to a lower generation level, or we can say from a parental generation level to filial generation level, okay. Let me give you an example. Let's say that we have parent generation P1, right, and then we have filial generation, let's call it as PF1. So let's say that if the parent has what we can say, we'll say that they have green eyes, right, and this property of having green eyes is passed down to the child also. The child also has green eyes. Then we would say that the green eye of this child is a hereditary property of their parent. So any biological traits or any biological property that a child gets from its parent, it is due to heredity. How would you write this answer then? Let me write it for you, okay. The passage of biological, you can write properties or you can write traits, both are the same thing, okay. The passage of biological traits from parental generation to the filial generation, or we can also say child generation, right, generation is considered as heredity, okay. When the biological traits are passed from one generation to another, this will be considered as heredity, okay. I believe this is clear to all of you. This is the answer, okay. Moving ahead, next thing is what happens if variation do not occur in species. Now if you remember, this question is from the theory of evolution of life, okay. Now if you remember that the very first cell in this earth was a unicellular organism, right. Now if you see, the theory of evolution of life says that this cell kept on modifying itself, and then we got variation in different types of species. Imagine that if it wouldn't do any variation. Imagine that very first cell which we had in our planet, it did not do any variation. By the way, variation means that making it different from others, right. So if there is no variation at all, till today the entire planet would be full of only unicellular organism, and we wouldn't have plants, animals, human beings, birds, cats, dogs around us, right. So all the living organisms that we see around us is just because of variation, okay. Now if there is no variation, then evolution will not happen and will not get variety of organisms in our planet. So that's the answer. Let's write that also. without variation, there will be no evolution, and variety in the living beings in the planet. Alright, I believe this is clear to all of you. Okay, fine. So this is the answer. Moving ahead to the next part. One of the most easiest question again. You just have a passage. You're supposed to read that passage and answer a very easy question. Okay. So the question says, read the paragraph and answer the given question. Ozone at the higher level of the atmosphere protects us from the ultraviolet radiation from the sun. This radiation is one of the cause of skin cancer in the human being. Now the question is, which ray cause skin cancer? Very simple, right? It says this radiation. And what radiation were we talking about? We were talking about ultraviolet radiation. So the answer to this question will be UV radiation. Okay, if you are writing UV radiation or ultraviolet radiation, both will be the correct answer and you will get 1 mark out of it. Okay, very simple. Let's move ahead. Fine. The next thing is, now we are starting with section number 2. Every question will carry 2 marks. So for every answer that I am writing, I will ensure that it should be lengthy enough that I can get 2 marks out of it. Okay, not much, not less. Okay, fine. Moving ahead. Write the difference between the biodegradable and non-biodegradable waste. Okay, so since it is of 2 marks, what I'll do is I'll write 3 points of differentiation over here. Okay, fine. So let's see. So first of all, for differentiation, it's always good to write or create a differentiation table, and then we have just a second, let me erase this. We have biodegradable waste, and then we have non-biodegradable waste. Okay, so point 1 for both the cases. Ideally for 2 marks you will write 2 points of differentiation, but to be on a safer side we will write 3, 1 point extra. Okay, so first point will be a biodegradable waste will be, we can say, decomposes easily in nature. Okay, decomposes easily in nature. Here we'll say does not decomposes in, hold on, let me erase this part. Does not decomposes in the nature or takes a lot of time. Okay, non-biodegradable waste will not decompose at all, or the decomposition timeline that it requires to get completely decomposed is so big that it might take several lifespan of people, which doesn't make sense, right? So therefore we'll consider that waste also as non-biodegradable waste. Okay, second, we can give some examples, or we can keep examples in the third point. Okay, so apart from that, what we can do is, usually organic waste, okay, organic waste comes under biodegradable waste or organic waste. Okay, I'll just write usually. Okay, now organic waste will be your peels of your fruits or vegetables, waste food, and then dead parts of the plant and animals. All of these things can be considered as organic waste. Okay, and usually unorganic or inorganic, I would say inorganic waste will come over here. However, there are certain exceptions also, but I'll just write usually over here to ensure that I'm taking care of the exception also without mentioning it. Okay, then we can write some examples. Okay, for example, I'll say fruit peels. Okay, fruit peels. And here example I can say radioactive heavy water. Okay, radioactive heavy water can be considered as a non-biodegradable waste, right? Apart from that, there are other wastes also, like for example waste created by biomedical activities like surgery or stuff, right? So that is also non-biodegradable waste. I believe this is clear to all of you. If you've written this much, then you will get 2 marks very easily. Okay, moving ahead to the next point. Okay, now the next question is, if hemoglobin level may decrease in our blood, what happens? Okay, now first of all, we'll need to understand what hemoglobin actually does. Now then only we'll be able to understand that if hemoglobin is not there, then what will not happen. Okay, so hemoglobin is actually present in the RBC, okay, which is red blood cell. Its key feature is to capture oxygen molecules and transport it from the place where it got oxygen to the place where the oxygen will be supplied or used. Okay, for example, cell and cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, so RBC, we know that it looks something like this if you see the cross section of it, right? And then the red color of this RBC actually comes from hemoglobin. Okay, and hemoglobin is actually used to carry oxygen. Okay, carry oxygen. If the amount of, and by the way, before talking ahead, I want you people to question this to yourself, that for what oxygen is used. Oxygen is supplied in the cytoplasm, which again goes into the mitochondria, and that is used to break down the complex sugar complexes into simpler one to generate ATP molecules. And these ATP molecules are actually used to perform, generate energy and do other tasks, right? So basically, in a nutshell, what I can say is that oxygen is used to generate energy in the human body, right? And therefore what we will say is that if hemoglobin is less, then oxygen will be less, and if oxygen is less, the amount of energy that our body will be creating will be less, and therefore in that case I would say that I will not feel energetic. I'll feel fatigue, I'll get dizzy, right? And then I'll not have any motivation to work. At times I can also fell out of dizziness also, right? So all of these things can happen if the amount of hemoglobin is reduced to very drastic level. Okay, so we'll just write it over here. So if hemoglobin is not there, I'll just write the keywords, but we can write it, we are expected to write it in complete sentences. Okay, so what we will feel is, what will happen? We'll feel fatigue. Why? Because blood oxygen level is less, so we'll say oxygen level will be reduced, right? And then we'll feel dizzy. Fourth one, we can say that we can also fall out of unconsciousness. Okay, so all of these things are the symptoms that a person can face if the amount of hemoglobin is reduced in the RBC of the blood. Okay, I believe this is clear. This, if you elaborate all of these points nicely, then you will get all the points. Okay, moving to the next question now. Question number 9. Read the given table and answer the following question. Okay, so we have the table over here. Okay, this is not match the following, basically one of the most easiest question again from this question paper. Okay, here we have plant hormone and what function they do. So auxin is for stimulating cells to grow longer, cytokinins is for promoting cell division, and abscisic acid is for inhibiting growth. Okay, so we have the name of the hormones, the phytohormones, and at the same time we also know the properties of it also. Now we are supposed to find or solve the questions. Okay, which hormone promotes cell division? So what are we supposed to find is cell division, and cell division is the second one, which is cytokinins. Very easy, so we can simply write cytokinins. Okay, then write the growth inhibiting hormone. So here the keyword is growth growth inhibiting, right? So this one inhibits growth, and therefore abscisic acid is the one. So the answer is abscisic acid. Okay, that's it. 2 marks in your hands. Okay, that's how easy this question was. Moving ahead to the next question. Okay, what question will you ask your teacher to know more about ecological system? Okay, when you say ecological system, it's a combination of all the all the interaction between organic and inorganic materials in the environment. Okay, so what question would you ask is something that you can put over here. So you can firstly ask what is biogeochemical cycle. So this basically is a cycle in which the natural objects or natural organisms are responsible for recycling inorganic substances. Okay, here the interaction between the plants, animals, and the inorganic factors like weather, weather, temperature, wind, all of these things will come into picture, and this will make the materials move from one place to another, all that stuff. Okay, so this is just a question that I came across that I can ask my teacher to understand about ecological system, but you can add any other question. There is no right or wrong answer in this question. Okay, second thing is, what is food chain? What is food chain, or you can say food web, right? Then we can also ask, what is the energy pyramid? Energy pyramid. Then you can also ask how ecological factors affects the livelihood of people living nearby, right? So these are few questions that I have added. However, you can add any other questions that you feel which is relevant to the topic that is given. The topic was ecological system, right? So there is no right and wrong answer over here. Even if you have not written any question which is mentioned over here, but it is related to ecological systems, and you have framed the sentence properly with proper spelling and grammar, then your answer will be considered and you will get the good scores out of it. Okay, we will be moving to the next question now. Okay, now moving to section number 3. Every question over here will carry 4 marks. So our length of the answer should be equivalent to get 4 marks. Okay, let's start. Okay, now here is, write the difference between arteries and veins. Okay, let's see if I have an empty slide. No. Okay, so here I'll be writing the differentiation point. Okay, now if we have 4 marks to gain, we'll write 2 points extra. So therefore we'll write total of 6 points altogether. Okay, so we have artery, and then we have veins. Okay, now point number 1 for both of them, artery will carry oxygenated blood. Okay, but there is one exception. The only artery which does not carry oxygenated blood is the pulmonary artery, which takes the deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs for oxygenation. So that is just one exception. Okay, and then vein. Vein will carry, we say, deoxygenated blood. Okay, it will carry deoxygenated blood. Okay, however, the only one vein, over here also we have the same exception, the only one type of vein which carries oxygenated blood is actually pulmonary vein. This vein actually carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. Okay, therefore here we can get the second point. Okay, second point is, in artery what happens is, every artery are those blood vessels which takes the blood from the heart and to the organs. So basically it takes the blood away from the heart. Okay, so I'll say blood moves away the heart. Okay, blood moves away the heart. Second point would be that for vein it would be blood moves. When we talk about veins, the blood will always be taken towards the heart. Okay, towards heart. Okay, third point. Now if you very tightly hold your arm, right, and the veins that you will see on the skin surface, these actually blood vessels are veins. However, arteries are very hard to see because they are embedded deep inside your muscles, which is very close to the bones. Okay, so the blood vessels that you will see are actually veins but not artery. Okay, so that's the third point over here. So we'll say that arteries are embedded deep near the bones and muscles. Okay, and veins, if you see, that they are present close to the skin. Okay, so if you talk about blood vessels which are deep inside, that will be what? It will be artery, and those that we can see like this are actually veins. Okay, now fourth point for both of them. Okay, now because the pressure of arteries are more, because it carries the high blood pressure coming from the blood from the heart. Therefore, what we'll say is, to withstand that high pressure, the walls will be thick. Okay, so we'll say walls will be thick, and here we'll say walls will be thin because the pressure comparatively will be less. Okay, then we'll come to the fifth point. Okay, now because the pressure in arteries are tremendous, the possibility of the blood to flow backward is very less, and therefore these blood vessels will not have valve to prevent backflow of blood. So we'll say there will be no valve. The valves are not present. Okay, but in case of vein, because the pressure is less, there is slight possibility that the blood might flow backward. Okay, and if the blood is flowing backward, deoxygenated blood might be mixed with oxygenated blood, leading to less efficiency of energy creation or energy generation, and therefore to avoid backflow of blood, veins will have valves. Okay, so we'll say valves are present. Okay, now I said 6 points, right? We are done with 5 points. See, for 4 marks 4 points is enough, but just to be on a safer side, we'll write 2 extra points also. Okay, now the last point we can say, we have written all of these points. Okay, we can write the exceptions that I've said. Okay, so exception is pulmonary artery, and pulmonary artery actually carries deoxygenated blood, and that flow is from heart to lungs. Okay, and here we have an exception. Exception is for pulmonary veins, pulmonary vein, and it will carry the oxygenated blood from lungs to heart. Okay, well, that's all the 6 points that we can write over here. Okay, and with this, if you have written any of these points, and even if you have written 4 points but they are completely accurate, then you will get the complete 4 marks out of it. Okay, so if you want, you can take a screenshot of this, then we'll be moving ahead to the next question. All right, let's move. Then the next question is, draw neat label diagram of neuron. Okay, one of the easiest diagram in biology textbook. Okay, and my trick in creating a neuron is super simple. The very first thing that you will be creating is the nucleus of this neuron. Okay, and then you can just create some U shapes like this, and if you create these kind of U shapes, you will end up having very nice neuron diagram, right? And then from here you can just create the axons. and then finally you'll have the nerve endings with these knobs. Okay, so this is how you can create a neuron in very without spending too much time, correct, very easily. Then you can label it. This is actually the nucleus, right? This is the cell body, right? This is the axons. These are the nerve endings, or neuron ending, we can say neuron ending. This is the place where synapse actually happen. Okay, and yeah, well, if you have written this much, then this will give you the entire scores. Okay, so this is how you can create a diagram for it. Okay, I believe everything is clear and no doubts are there, right? All right, fine. So you can take a screenshot of this if it is needed. We'll be moving on to the next question then. Okay, fine. Here option B, this is an optional question. Okay, so if you are not aware of the previous neuron diagram part, then you could have solved this part. Okay, here it is. Observe the given diagram and answer the following question. Okay, so here we have the diagram of a female vagina. Okay, it's a female reproductive part, and we have two parts labeled over here as A and B. Okay, now if you look over here, the first question says identify part A and B. So part A is nothing but the place where all the eggs are present, the female gametes or the ovulas are present. Okay, so this is actually called as the ovary. Okay, fine. And then B part over here is labeled, and this place is the place where the zygote actually sits and the growth of the a baby or a fetus takes place, right? So this place is actually the uterus. Okay, so we have identified A and B from the diagram, and then second thing is fertilization of egg cells occurs in which part. Okay, now fertilization of egg occurs in which part? Fertilization means the mixing of the male and the female gamete. Okay, so this usually happens in this region, the fallopian tube, or at times just outside the fallopian tube in the uterus part. Okay, or the entrance of the uteral part. So therefore we'll say the fallopian tube or the uterus upper part. So these are the places where fertilization of egg can actually happen. Okay, then the third question says implantation of the embryo occurs in which part? Implantation as in the embedding of that zygote will be happening where? So I have already explained that will be taking place in the uterus. So we will say that it will take place in the uterus. So if you have answered all of these questions this way, you will get complete marks. Okay, one of the most easiest question over here also. Okay, moving ahead to the next question. Write the different types of contraceptive methods. Okay, now again we need to make sure that we need to keep this in mind that we have 4 marks to get over here, which means that writing only 1 or 2 lines will be very less. We need to write detailed way. Okay, I'll write the keywords and explain to the keywords that how you were supposed to write the answer for it. Okay, so when you talk about contraceptive means prevention of pregnancy. Okay, so there are several methods for prevention of pregnancy, and we'll talk about all of these one by one. Okay, so the first category over here is actually called as creating physical barriers. Spelling mistake, wait. Creating physical barriers. Hold on. Okay, creating physical barriers. Okay, now there are several methods of creating physical barriers. I'll write the keywords and then explain them. Okay, just for example, the first one, just give me a second. For some reason the board is giving me a hard time, but yeah. Okay, so point number 1. Okay, point number 1 is using condoms. Okay, now condoms are actually creating physical barriers in the penis part. Okay, and therefore the sperm released by the penis will not enter the vaginal opening. Okay, second thing is using a femidome. Okay, now femidomes are also called as female condoms. Okay, so if you write femidomes or female condoms, both are the same thing. Okay, so female condoms are actually the condoms which are used inside the vaginal opening, and this will prevent the sperms which is released by the penis to it will prevent it to get fertilized with the egg. Okay, then the next thing we would say is using something which is called as copper T. Okay, now copper T is actually used to prevent the passage of sperms into the fallopian tube, because the T shape of it will block the fallopian tube, and therefore the eggs which can come from the fallopian tube towards the uterus will be blocked, and therefore since there will be no eggs present over there, and therefore the sperms will not be able to fertilize any eggs at all. Okay, so this is these 3 points will be enough if you explain them elaborately in physical barriers. Okay, then we have point B, which is called as surgical methods. Surgical methods. Now surgical methods are permanent methods, which means that if once it is done, we cannot reverse it. Okay, now in surgical method there are two very commonly known practices. Okay, now the two practices is, first one is called as we'll say tubectomy. Okay, tubectomy. Now what is tubectomy? Basically what happens is, it's a surgery procedure where the fallopian tubes are cut and then they are stitched, so that the connection between the ovary and the uterus is broken, and therefore the eggs which are released from the ovary will never reach the uterus, and therefore the fertilization will never take place. Okay, so a person who is undergoing tubectomy will never be able to get have the ability to give birth. Okay, then the second one, by the way, tubectomy, because it's a surgery of fallopian tube, it's very evident that it is actually only for females. Okay, then the second type of surgery and a common practice is called as vasectomy, and vasectomy is done for males. Okay, in this surgery what happens is, the connection between the testis and the penis is broken down, and that broken connection prevents the sperm to be released from the testis to the urethral opening, and therefore again a person who is doing this will never be able to give birth, right? So for males the surgical method is vasectomy, for females the surgical method is tubectomy. Okay, now then there are other methods also, like for example oral methods. Okay, now when we talk about oral methods, the first thing and a very common practice is using birth control pills. Okay, now these pills are taken to induce certain hormonal reactions in your body, and therefore the eggs will be released before the menstrual cycle actually takes place. Okay, and therefore the birth will not be the pregnancy will actually not be induced. Okay, so I've written many examples over here, and taking all the points, if you elaborate this using 2 or 3 pointers, then therefore you can get enough marks. Any which ways there are more methods also over here, but I think that for 4 marks writing these points will be more than enough. Okay, I have just written the keywords, but if you would have elaborated, it would get big enough to cover half of the page, right? So yeah, this is the answer for different types of contraceptive methods. We have covered 3 types: physical method, surgical method, and oral method. Right, there are other methods also, chemical methods also, but we'll not spend too much time in discussing about that. I believe this is clear to all of you. Okay, the next thing is, suggest some environmental friendly practices to protect our nature. Okay, now this is one of the most easiest question, and this is coming for only 4 marks. You should be very happy for it. Okay, so let's see the first part. Okay, the question is what you will do to help the environment. Okay, what is environmental friendly practices? Okay, first of all we can use public transportation. Okay, public transportation as much as possible, because if everyone will think to use their own personal vehicle, the amount of what I can say, the amount of pollutants which will be released in the atmosphere will be too much, right? So therefore sharing of transportation system using public transportation is one of the best practices. Also, there are few European countries who follow the practice of using bicycle for short distances, right? This can also be part of our lives. Third, next thing that we can do is separate or segregate the waste into dry and wet, right? Dry and wet. Now, why is it important? Because dry waste can be recycled and wet waste can be converted into organic decomposed material which can be used as a manure or a fertilizer, right? Okay. Fourth one, if we move ahead, we'll say use the resources I would say use the resources sustainably, as in we should always keep the thought of our future generation in mind while using the resources, so that our future generation might also get enough resources the way that we do. Okay. Then talking about the next point, so writing 4 points is enough, I'm just writing 1 point extra over here. Okay. The next point can be we will say having strong strong or very stringent government policies, and so on and so forth, right? So there are tons of things that you can write because it's a very open-ended question. I've written a few pointers. If you have written something around similar to this, then you will get the scores out of it. Okay, let me see if we got any comments so far. Okay, fine, let's move ahead then. Moving ahead, the next question is observe the given chart and answer the following question. Okay, here we have the chart of cellular respiration, and we understood that glucose is converted into pyruvate, and depending upon the amount of oxygen present, this pyruvate can undergo different cycles or different pathways. Okay, so we'll see what questions we have. Question is, what is the first step occurs in the respiration of cell? When we talk about respiration of cell, the very first step that happens in the cytoplasm is conversion of glucose to pyruvate. Okay, that is the first step that happens. Okay, and this happens inside the cytoplasm. Okay, so glucose, which is a 6-carbon compound, will be converted into pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound. Okay, so moving ahead, we'll say glucose will get converted into pyruvate. Okay, you can write it in more elaborated way. Okay, moving ahead to the next, in which cell lactic acid occurs. Okay, so formation of lactic acid is over here, and that happens in our muscle cell. Okay, so we'll say muscle cell, and due to the presence of this lactic acid is we feel fatigue when we do a lot of physical exercise or physical work. Okay, then third one is aerobic respiration occurs in which organelle of the cell. Okay, let's talk about aerobic respiration. Okay, aerobic respiration is actually the respiration which takes place in the abundance of oxygen. So when you talk about abundance of oxygen, that is presence of oxygen, and that actually happens inside the mitochondria. So that's the answer for us. Okay, so we'll say mitochondria. Okay, then the fourth one is, what are the end products released in the anaerobic respiration of the yeast? Now anaerobic means what? Anaerobic means lack of oxygen, or there is no oxygen at all. Okay, fine. So we'll see the place where there is no oxygen at all. So absence of oxygen, that is actually in the yeast, and the end products are these. So this part is actually your answer. Okay, so ethanol, carbon dioxide, and energy are the things that we have. Okay, all right. All right, let's move ahead. I've seen that there are few comments that are coming in the chat section, and they are demanding for certain questions. We have solved all the questions, so by the end of the session I will go back to those slides and show you the correct answer. Okay, so till then be with me. Okay, let us solve all the questions, these questions first. Okay, now I was in this question, so this part is the answer. Okay, ethanol plus carbon dioxide plus energy. So we'll say ethanol plus carbon dioxide plus actually we'll have 2 molecules of ATP over here. Okay, fine. Let's see if we are missing on any question. All questions are done. Okay, so if you have written all of these questions, you will get total of 4 marks. Okay, moving on to the next question. All right, finally we have the next section and the last section number 4. Every question over here will carry 8 marks. So these questions will be really very big. You'll need to make sure that this 8 mark is in your head while you're writing the answer, so that the length of your answer will be depending upon the marks. Okay, moving to the next slide. Okay, here we have describe the experiment to prove that carbon dioxide is essential for photosynthesis in plant. Okay, this is first, and the second one is describe the experiment you conduct to show the response of plant in the direction of light. Okay, so both of these two are coming from the I would say the life process chapter. Okay, and we'll talk about that. So I'll explain the setup and verbally explain the entire process, that how you can determine it. However, you were expected to write it in great detail along with the diagram. Okay, because this is 8 mark question. Okay, let me see if we have empty slide. No. Okay, no worries. Fine. So what we'll do is we'll divide this, and first we'll solve A over here. Okay, when we have A, what we'll do is we want to prove that carbon dioxide is necessary for photosynthesis to take place. Okay, for photosynthesis to take place. In that case, what we will do is we will take one potted plant. Okay, so let's say that we have a container, a transparent container, and inside that transparent container I have a potted plant. Okay, like this, and this transparent container is sealed pack. Okay, it is air sealed, which means that no air can come inside. Okay, and then here we'll have a compound kept. This compound is actually potassium hydroxide. Okay, potassium hydroxide. Now what is the property of this potassium hydroxide? Potassium hydroxide is actually a good absorbent of carbon dioxide. Okay, so whatever air it has, this lid or this container has, it will still have some trace amount of carbon dioxide in it. So this potassium hydroxide will do what? It will absorb all the carbon dioxide from it, making this lid completely free of carbon dioxide. Okay, now once we have this setup ready, then you can just keep this in dark room. If you keep this in dark room, what will happen is it will not do photosynthesis. Why? Because there is no light and there is no carbon dioxide also. Okay, now to see that if adding light will do the photosynthesis part or not, what we can do is we can take it towards bright light also, like a sunlight. Okay, we can keep it in sunlight. Now once it is kept in sunlight but still it is sealed, okay, it has no external source of carbon dioxide coming in. Even if we put it inside or in the sunlight, what will happen is the plant will not grow, and slowly and gradually you will see that these leaves will turn brown. This browning of leaf is actually wilting of leaves, right? This is called as wilting of leaves. This wilt will happen. Why? Because they are not, the plant is not producing enough energy sources, and all the stored starch inside that plant is also consumed, and therefore the plant will slowly and gradually lead towards death. Right, so this will conclude that presence of carbon dioxide is really very important despite having the sunlight and the water molecules over here. So this is a very simple and straightforward experiment that can be done to see if carbon dioxide is actually necessary for photosynthesis to take place or not. Okay, so let's move ahead to the next question. Question number B over here we have. So describe experiment you conduct to show the response of plant to the direction of light. Okay, so let's say that this is your window. Okay, and from this window you'll have some light coming in like this. Okay, now what you will do is you will take one potted plant. Okay, let's say two potted plants. One potted plant will be, let me erase this. We'll take two potted plants, one which is right beside the window but not exactly to the sunlight, and the other one over here. Okay, now if you see, we have potted plant A and potted plant B. Okay, as these two plants will grow, plant B will always have abundant amount of sunlight falling on it, and therefore it will keep on growing taller this way. Why? Because it will have abundant amount of sunlight if it goes tall. Okay, however, if you look in this position of the potted plant, the sunlight is falling only in the bottom portion of it and not higher, and therefore what will happen is a stimulus, this is a stimulus, right? The presence of sunlight is considered as a stimulus, and therefore due to phototropism the plant will grow towards the light, and therefore what will happen is this plant will bend, and after bending it will move towards a place where the amount of sunlight is more, so that photosynthesis can happen. Now why didn't this plant bend? Because it was having abundant amount of sunlight throughout its growth period, but for when you talk about plant A, it was not getting sufficient amount of sunlight, and therefore it bended towards the direction where sufficient amount of sunlight was received, and therefore this experiment can explain that the plant will respond to the stimulus, and the stimulus is actually the presence of sunlight. Okay, and this is due to phototropism. We have learned this while we were learning phytohormones as in plant hormones. Okay, so this is called as phototropism. Okay, this is due to phytohormone called auxin. Okay, I believe this is clear to all of you, right? So we have solved both of these two questions, either this or that. Both are experimental basis. You should describe all of these things in great detail so that you can get good marks out of it. Okay, 8 marks for each question. Okay, let's move ahead now. I believe this is the last question. Yes, question number 17. So again we have two questions over here. Let me see if we have empty slides. No. Okay, so question number A, explain the process of sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Okay, I'll not write all the steps in detail, but we'll see this very quickly using some diagram. Okay, so let's say that this is the ovule of a flowering plant, and this is the style, and here is the stigma. Okay, inside that we have the ovule, and then we have the petals, right? And then here also, right, something like this, and then here we have the calyx, and then calyx grows into stem, right? And then here you will see androecium, and basically this entire thing is the gynoecium. Androecium is considered as the male reproductive part of the flowering of the flower, and gynoecium is the female reproductive part. Okay, now if you see over here, the main, when we talk about sexual reproduction, it is actually mixing of gametes, isn't it? Right, mixing of gametes. So we need to first understand that where these gametes are. Okay, in case of flowering plants, the male gametes are present over here. Okay, these are actually called as anthers. Okay, and it will have pollen grains. So basically the pollen grain is the male gamete in terms of flowering plants. Okay, then talking about the female gametes, this one over here is the ovule or the female egg, we could say. Okay, so the ovule over here in this case, which is sitting inside the ovary, hold on, let me just correct it. This is actually ovula, ovule is also correct, because ovula is the plural of, sorry, ovule is the plural of ovula. Okay, so here we'll say ovula because I've just made one egg over here, and this is sitting inside the ovary. Okay, now the idea is that when you talk about sexual reproduction, we always know that mixing of gamete take place. The gametes are female and male gametes. In this case, it is the pollen grain and the ovula. Okay, now the pollen grain is over here and the ovula is over here, which means that it is supposed to move from here and go inside and get fused with this part, right? If this is done, then we'll say that fertilization has taken place. However, there are several modes and several methods for this pollen grain to move. There is natural method also. Natural methods as when the winds are blowing, the pollen grains will just be released and suspended on the stigma. That is one. If the rains are falling and then the raindrops are making the branches and the leaves move, that is another example where the pollen grains will fall on the style and then it will get fertilization done, right? So the natural methods are there. I'll just write over here. We have natural method. Okay, now the second one is induced pollination. Okay, now this induced pollination actually takes place by two different methods. Okay, one is natural and the other one is artificial. Now when you talk about artificial method, what happens is person actually takes the pollen grain and very carefully place it on the stigma. Okay, basically this upper body, the upper part is actually called as the stigma. So the pollen grain is kept inside that stigma. Okay, so a person does it. Okay, therefore that will be called as artificial. The natural method is by many vectors. Okay, now over here vector is actually some living organism. For example, a cow is simply passing by and rubbing across the body of a plant, right? It might happen that the pollen of that flower gets stick to that cow's body, and then the cow is moving ahead, and in another flower the pollen grain is settled in other flowers stigma. So this is a vector. The cow will act as a vector which will move a pollen grain from one point to another. Another most common example is honeybees. Honeybees can also be considered as a vector. So when the honeybees sit on a flower to suck out the nectar from it, at that time there is a high possibility that the pollen grains will settle on the honeybee's back or body, right? And then when this honeybee will move from one place to another and sit on any other flower, there is higher chances that that pollen grain will settle down in that stigma, leading to pollination to happen. Okay, so this is pollination. So step one is pollination, which means that making this pollen grain move from its anther to the stigma. Okay, to the stigma. Okay, then we have the second step will be germination. Okay, now what happens in germination is these pollen grain which are settled on the stigma, right? They will produce or create an outgrowth, and this outgrowth will move from the stigma all the way up to style, and by the way this tube is actually called as style. Okay, will create a a tube like structure inside the style, and then it will go and fuse with inside the ovule, right? Now this tube that this pollen grain will be creating will be called as pollen tube, and from that pollen tube the male gamete will be released, and that will travel from the style to the ovary inside the ovula. And once the ovula and the pollen grain both fuses together, then the fertilization is successful, and therefore that will lead into a seed. Okay, then the third step will be maturity. Okay, the third step will be maturity. Here the ovule will turn into seed, and all the other materials or the flower itself will turn into a fruit, and this fruit will enclose the seed, keeping the seed safe and also storing the necessary amount of energy that it will require to germinate when it is turning into a plant. Okay, so this is how the sexual reproduction in flowering plant actually happen. Okay, Now the next thing is, how is the sex of a child determined in human being? Now this can be answered in one sentence also, right? It depends upon the sex chromosomes, and sex chromosomes are of two types, X and Y. Okay, we have X chromosomes and we have Y chromosome. So when sexual reproduction takes place between two human beings, right, in that case half, let's say, what I'll do is, let me go to the previous slide. Okay, let's use this place. Okay, so what happens is, let's say that we have a male and then we have a female. Okay, so the female sex chromosomes are always X and X, and male chromosomes are also X and Y, always X and Y. Okay, now once the reproduction between these two actually happen, what will happen is, due to law of segregation according to Mendelian law, what we'll say is that these gametes will divide into two parts. So we have X and then we have Y, okay, from the male, and again the law of segregation will segregate these two also. So we have X and again we have X. Now we don't know that which gamete will be fused with which other gamete, right? So we'll talk about all the different types of possibility. Okay, so this X from the male can combine with this X with the female, or this X of the male can combine with another X of the female. So in this case what we'll get is XX and XX, and because both of these two are XX, we will say that female child will be born. However, if a male Y chromosome is being used, with either of these two cases we'll get XY and XY, right? And therefore we'll say the chances of getting a male child or a female child is 50-50. Okay, so if coming to a nutshell, if the child sex chromosome is XX, the child will be a female girl. Okay, and then if the sex chromosome of the male chromosome will be X and Y, then it will be a male. Okay, so this is the conclusion for this question. Okay, I believe this is clear to all of you, right? Great, wonderful. Okay, so here we are done with solving all the questions of this paper. Now I will be coming to the comment section. I will address all the comments that you have shared with me. Okay, so Swati Bindu is saying good afternoon. Good afternoon. I believe that you have understood everything, right? Sir, question 3 answer. Okay, so we'll be moving to question number 3. I believe that this will be helpful for you. We'll say keep. Okay, we'll see that. So question number 3, let me go to question number 3. Okay, this is question number 3, right? So question number 3 is a blood pressure measuring device. This is called as sphygmomanometer. Okay, this is the answer. Let's see if anyone else is asking. So transpiration, raste mark was sir. Okay, transpiration. Okay, so let me show you the transpiration slide as well. We have already discussed that in detail. So that was the first question of our paper, right? So we saw that the force which is responsible, the process which is responsible for pulling the water from the root to the leaves is actually transpiration, and that force is actually called as transpirational pull, which creates a partial vacuum inside it. Okay, fine. Any other comments, dear students? Any other questions? Great, wonderful. Okay, I believe that I have answered all the comments over here also. So yes, we'll be moving to the last screen and we'll be ending this session now. Okay, so thank you dear students for being with me and engaging with me throughout the session also. I would strongly suggest all of you to go to your app store or play store and download the CCA class app, where you can see many other courses that we actually provide, and this way we just do not focus on getting the marks but also explain the concepts for each and everything, so that you get very good marks in your examinations. Okay, so yeah, please go ahead and download the CCA class app, and to ensure that you're not missing on any important updates from our channel, make sure that you're liking it, subscribing it and sharing it with your friends who might need this. Okay, this will ensure that you are not missing on any live sessions that we are having. This kind of live session keeps on happening every day in our channel. Okay, so with this I am signing off here, Ahmed sir, with this biology paper solving session. Thank you so much. We'll see you very soon. Bye bye, and all the best for your further exams.